How'd you get in my house? No. No! Hello everyone, my name is Ian, the part-time Dungeon Master, and it's D20 Sundays all over again. Every Sunday here on this channel. Anyways, so today's on, not 4th edition, because I don't like 4th edition. I found this in a this one store for like $25, and I was like, I don't really own any of the 4th edition books. So I grabbed it. And honestly, I have no intentions of ever playing 4th edition again. Ever. And I could spend a whole episode just ragging on 4th edition, but I'm not going to. One, because a lot of people have already done it before me. It's like beating a dead horse that's been dead for about 10 years. There's no point in it. So instead I wanted to talk about the edition wars that have happened, throughout the history of Dungeons & Dragons. You see, D&D first came out in 1974 due to a group known as TSR, which everyone also credits Gary Gygax as being a part of. In fact, him and the others at TSR were pretty much the creators of this whole world that we now play in. Greyhawk was their original creation. And, like I said, it came out in 1974. You got the dice and you had to color them in crayons and all that jazz. And it was kind of a, janky at first. But it was definitely something new, something that no one had essentially thought of before. The first of its kind. And that's the reason why a lot of people refer to D&D as the grandfather of role-playing games, because without D&D, a lot of role-playing games, especially here in the West, in the United States and stuff, just wouldn't exist anymore, or they just wouldn't exist, period, because there was no inspiration to make something like that. And it's like, why play a game that tells a story? Play a game that, you shoot bad guys. Sure, there were some stories in video games, to begin with, Contra-ish, and, a few others, but really the idea of a role-playing game in the United States didn't exist until Dungeons & Dragons. And, there's the whole satanic panic about D&D for the longest time. It's like, they believe that they can truly cast magic and stuff. And it's like, the good old satanic panic. I always liked it because it sounded metal, It's like, it's the satanic panic. But really, it's just like, pretty much the same thing we have with video games today, in the sense that, people are, blaming it because they don't understand it and they need a scapegoat for their bad parenting. So, when it comes down to Dungeons & Dragons, though, like I said, it was first originally printed out in 1974 by the folks at TSR. And then they took all of the printings that they did, essentially all the books that they made, the core rule books, the addendum books, the additional players' handbooks, the Player's Guide to Being a Paladin, the Player's Guide to Being a Bard, and so on and so forth. And they took all of those and they reprinted them again in 1977 to be First Edition. So there's a very clear difference between OD&D and First Edition, because when it came to First Edition, they took all those books together, bound them up into essentially one set of core rule books, the Player's Guide, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual, and they essentially reworked the rules in them as well. They tweaked the rules a little bit, not majorly, but enough to be noticeable, and they reprinted it out as First Edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And, well, actually, I think they just printed it out as Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And then, again, in 1980, they did the exact same thing, where they had, printed out other books for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, either, rule tweaking, adding something like the Psionics class, and so on. And they, pushed it out again, this time as Second Edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Again, note the difference in name. There's Dungeons & Dragons, which was the original in 1974, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons in 1977, and then Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition in 1980. This caused a bit of a stir at the time because, people kind of argued as to which edition was better, which rules they liked, which ones they didn't like, and it pretty much started the edition wars in Dungeons & Dragons. In fact, it didn't pretty much. It absolutely did start the edition wars in Dungeons & Dragons. And this pretty much went on for a short amount of time, and things calmed down for a good bit, because there was not another edition printed out for 20 years. That's right, for 20 years, the newest and best edition of Dungeons & Dragons was 2nd edition. And then in 2000, Wizards of the Coast, after appropriating TSR, decided to essentially bring life back into D&D, to try and bring it a little bit more to, like, the mainstream. So they printed out 3rd edition. They completely revamped the rules. They did away with THAC0 and brought in the new D20 system and reworked how armor class works. They definitely made some major changes to races, classes, and so on. Because remember, back in the older editions, elf and dwarf were classes, not just races. And so with the whole, changing of things, when 3rd edition came out, a lot of people, got their pitchforks ready because they didn't like change. 3rd edition was definitely a wonderful thing compared to the older editions. And I say that because I played the older editions, and I've played 3rd edition and 3.5. In 1st and 2nd and, original Dungeons & Dragons, the whole, it's a lot more heavy, in the sense that, oh, you hit, 0 hit points, your character's dead. No death saves, no negative hit points, you're just dead. And if your party resurrects you, you lose a level. Yay, fun. There's a number of other things, especially considering that the rules for the old school Dungeons and Dragons was definitely a meat grinder of characters. Your character, saves against the falling ceiling trap. In newer editions, the falling ceiling trap, does like a few d6 of damage. In older editions, it was save or die. Just flat out save or die. Have fun. And there's a lot of traps that were just like save versus death. So, with 3rd edition, they kind of reworked that a little bit, and they definitely toned down a little bit of those. You can die to a random trap because you're unlucky. And the 3rd edition went for 3 years. You see, after 3 years, they decided to add on to 3rd edition with something known as 3.5, which is what a lot of people used for the longest time because, well, it was pretty good. And actually, they used it for about 5 years. But 3.5 was an extension of the 3rd edition rules. They clarified a number of rules, added more rules, and essentially made the system better and made it work more while essentially constraining it more with rules. Much more situational rules that you normally wouldn't think of asking. But at the same time, it was necessary because, those situations do sometimes come up. And then in 2008, 4th edition came out. This god-awful thing. Not going to rag on it. Not going to rag on it. Not going to rag on it. 4th edition came out, and, once again, the whole edition war was starting up again. With this, well, it was kind of started up with 3rd edition, but it was starting up again with a new wave of it, of 3rd, 3.5, and 4th, all arguing as to which edition is best, and which one essentially helps the game play smoother and gives the Dungeon Master a bit more freedom. As well as gives the players, more chance for creativity. So it's bad. 4th edition's bad. It's not absolutely dredging the bottom of the lake terrible, but it's bad. And I get it, they were doing some sort of sundering thing in the books where, like, magic's kind of gone for a short amount of time. The gods cannot intervene in the mortal plane and all that fun jazz. But nonetheless, 4th edition was around for a year. Well, to be fair, it was actually around for about, 5th edition or D&D Next came out in 2014. But you see, back in 2009, a year after 4th edition was printed, Paizo, who had recently done a lot of the Dungeons & Dragons magazines and a lot of the 3.5 third-party material and, adventure modules, they heard that, hey, for, Wizards of the Coast is breaking away completely from 3.5, going forward with 4th edition, and eventually to this new thing called D&D Next. And Paizo was like, no. So Paizo made Pathfinder, and now Pathfinder 2nd Edition, as it's recently been announced, but that's something else. Pathfinder came out in 2009, and essentially silenced a lot of the edition war, essentially because it was a good balance between 3.5 and 4th edition, as well as it helped smooth out so many of the bad rules that were in 4th edition and made them a little bit more comprehensive. And when it came down to Pathfinder, it's a lot more, just like 3rd edition, it's a lot more numbers heavy. I have a character sheet somewhere of my rogue that has like a plus 32 or something to stealth. It's like, I don't really need to roll for stealth because no one's ever going to see me. You know, things like that. So, you know, Pathfinder was really good, and I really enjoyed Pathfinder, especially compared to the other editions that I had played. And then 2014 rolled around, where, you know, there was this long silence from, you know, Wizards of the Coast as to, is a new edition of Dungeons & Dragons coming out? And then announced was D&D Next, which D&D Next... Alright, let me clarify, there's a difference between D&D Next and D&D 5th Edition. So D&D Next was the playtest to 5th Edition, and D&D Next was awful. It allowed too much argument between the dungeon master and the player. It was about the beginnings of the advantage rolls. A player could make a case essentially as to why they deserve advantage, and I kind of don't like that as a dungeon master. I get to decide whether or not you could have an advantage, and you arguing with me that you should be able to get advantage, it's like, no. While I do like the idea that, you know, a player can suggest, hey, you know, since I'm doing this, would I get advantage? That's a little bit more nicer versus, hey, since I'm doing this, I should get advantage. Which D&D Next kind of allowed. And it started that whole thing, and it started a number of other problems that thankfully were worked out of, you know, D&D Next and, you know, put into 5th edition with the, you know, the changes to the playtest rules and so on. And then really D&D Next and 5th edition, I want to say that they helped push Dungeons & Dragons back into the mainstream and definitely like in center stage with, you know, Chris Perkins, one of the main writers for, you know, Wizards of the Coast, running Acquisitions Inc., which is, you know, a penny arcade D&D group, essentially in front of a live crowd and also on a podcast of like, hey, you know, we're just sitting around playing Dungeons & Dragons using D&D Next. And then, you know, it became, we're using D&D 5th edition. And I feel like that definitely helped get Dungeons & Dragons into the mainstream, and even more so once, you know, Critical Role started, you know, being a thing. Dungeons & Dragons has definitely become much more mainstream now than it has ever been. Certainly have gone by the days that, you know, it's the Satanic Panic, but the edition war still kind of happens to this day. Not to the, you know, vehemency of, you know, people ripping people to shreds on the internet like, no, you're wrong! This edition is better. No, that's gone, hopefully. It's much more, it's like, hey, do you want to play Dungeons & Dragons? Sure, what edition are we playing? 5th edition. I'm still an old school guy. I like 3.5, or I like Pathfinder. Or, you know, God forbid, I like 4th edition. But those days are gone, so to where, you know, it's much more respectful of what edition you want to play, and 5th edition is so much easier that I've gotten players who have not played D&D since the 80s to play 5th edition, and they like it, and they like how smooth and easy the system runs. That it allows for much more, you know, role-playing and storytelling versus, you know, strictness of rules of how combat should go. Streamlined, but not overly simplified. D&D Next was overly simplified to where it was just annoying. But yeah, that's essentially all I want to talk about for today for D20 Sundays was essentially the edition wars of Dungeons & Dragons and what years all the, you know, editions came out and what impacts that they had. You know, like I said, with the original OD&D first and second edition, we had the Satanic Panic. Parents worried that, because they can't seem to actually parent right, that their children are, worshiping devils in the basement while playing Imagination. Uh, I actually still meet people today who are like, but isn't Dungeons and Dragons the devil's game? I'm like, no! No! Actually, before I end the video, what was the Satanic Panic? Okay, the Satanic Panic was a period in time in which, parents were protesting against, Satanism or anything remotely satanic or anything non-Christian that could be perceived as satanic. In other words, Muslim, Jewish, paganism, witchcraft, and so on. Anything not Christian was satanic. And so they saw Dungeons and Dragons, this game, this harmless little game where, kids were able to essentially play Imagination with a set bound amount of rules. And the kids loved it because it helped them with team building. It helped them learn. It helped them, use their imagination to their benefit, and all this has. And it helped build friendships. And parents saw it as, oh God, they're worshiping the devil because they're playing this game where there's devils and demons and they can go around killing people, and it's stupid. But that was the Satanic Panic, and it still kind of exists to this day to an extent. It's just kind of like shifted forms. Now it's more focused on video games. Like, video games have become too violent. And it's like, yeah, that's why we have the ESRB. It tells you, the parent, what is appropriate for your child to play. If your child is 10, do not give them GTA. It's like, oh my God. The Satanic Panic still exists to this day because of, in my opinion, bad parenting. Simple as it is. The reason why it happened in the 80s with, with Dungeons and Dragons was the whole bad parenting. They did not understand what their children were doing, and they had no interest in understanding what their children were doing. They had no interest in what their children were interested in. They just wanted their children to do what they wanted them to do. Instead of trying to, allow the child to grow and find out who they are. They were too constrained in this whole, like, oh, what would the neighbors think? Yeah. But now it's on video games. Now it's on video games in the sense that, they distract them from, the real world. It doesn't really give them any social skills or anything. Just not fully right, but it's not fully wrong at the same time. Like, I don't want my son playing video games all day long, but at the same time, I understand that it's a way of getting away from the world that we're in. And the world we're in is not always great. Not for everyone. For some of us, it's pretty bad. And Dungeons and Dragons and video games is our way of getting away from that world and going to somewhere where we can actually make a difference. Because sometimes in this world, the only difference we can make is the person that we help up off the floor when they fall over. Anyways, that's it for this D20 Sundays. I'll catch you next time.